Before the oak doors of the Orsino estate could close against the November wind, before the guards could step forward with hands resting on their holsters, a voice that had been silent for 18 months echoed across the marble foyer. It carried a question no wife should ever have to ask. "Do you even remember what I looked like the night you told me to leave?" The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. The silence that followed was suffocating. But the second question was worse. Or, were you too busy looking at her to notice I was carrying your children? 30 feet away, standing in the doorway of his private study, the man who had banished his own wife went completely still. Because Caius Orsino had prepared himself for enemies. He had prepared for betrayal, for blood, for war. He had not prepared for this. Not for her. And not for the 3 infants she held against her chest. The town of Bracken Harbor sat 40 miles north of Orsino territory, far enough to be forgotten but close enough to feel the shadow. It was a place where the fishing boats came back emptier each year, and the storefronts on Main Street had given up replacing the bulbs in their signs. A town where no one asked questions because no one expected answers. Vespera had chosen it for exactly that reason. The apartment she'd rented was on the 3rd floor of a building that groaned when the wind blew from the east. The hallways smelled of mildew and old cigarettes. The radiator worked in unpredictable bursts, and she'd learned to keep the babies bundled even indoors, layering them in thrift store blankets that had been washed so many times the fabric felt like paper. The window in the bedroom faced a brick wall. No view. No light after 2 p.m. She'd hung a yellow curtain she'd found at a garage sale, not because it helped, but because she needed something in the room that wasn't gray. The crib had been donated by a church 3 blocks away. It was built for 1 child, but she'd made it work for 3, positioning them carefully each night like puzzle pieces, praying none of them would roll, praying the warmth between their small bodies would be enough. 18 months in this town. 8 of those with infants. 8 months of powdered formula and sleepless nights, and learning to do everything with one hand because the other was always holding a baby. 18 months of silence from the man who had once promised to protect her. Bracken Harbor wasn't a place people came to live. It was a place people came to disappear. And for 18 months, Vespera Orsino had done exactly that. Vespera Licen Orsino was 31 years old. She had dark auburn hair that she hadn't cut since leaving the estate, now long enough to braid down her back, though most days she simply tied it with whatever was within reach. A rubber band, a strip of fabric torn from an old shirt, once a twist tie from a bread bag when nothing else was clean. Her eyes were the color of wet slate, and they carried a weight that hadn't been there 2 years ago. The weight that comes from counting coins at 2 a.m. while 3 infants sleep in a borrowed crib. The weight that comes from calculating how many days a can of formula will last if you measure each scoop exactly, level it with a knife, and never round up. She had learned to move quietly, not because anyone was listening, but because silence had become a habit. In the estate, silence had been survival. Speaking at the wrong moment, asking the wrong question, standing in the wrong doorway when Caius was in one of his moods. These were the things that changed an evening from tolerable to unbearable. She didn't flinch at loud noises anymore. That reflex had faded somewhere around the 6th month in Bracken Harbor, replaced by something duller, a constant low-level alertness that never fully switched off. She slept in 2-hour intervals, not just because the triplets demanded it, but because her body had forgotten how to rest longer than that. The babies had names she had chosen alone, in the hospital, while the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead and no one stood beside her bed. Stellan, the firstborn by 4 minutes. He had his father's dark hair and a calm that felt almost eerie in a newborn, as if he had already decided that crying was inefficient. Mira, the only girl. She had Vespera's eyes and a grip so strong the nurses had laughed about it. "This one's going to be trouble," they'd said, And Vespera had smiled and said nothing because trouble was the last thing she could afford. Cale, the smallest. He had come into the world 2 pounds lighter than his siblings, and for 3 weeks he'd stayed in the NICU under warming lamps, while Vespera sat beside the incubator and whispered promises she wasn't sure she could keep. He had her mother's nose. Her mother, who had died when Vespera was 19 and had never met any of her grandchildren and never would. She had left the estate with $400 in cash, a suitcase she'd quietly packed over weeks, and a positive pregnancy test she hadn't yet told anyone about. Caius had handed her the money himself, peeled the bills off a roll like he was tipping a valet, and told her this was more than she deserved. "You're replaceable," he had said. "Selene isn't." Selene, the mistress. The woman who had appeared in their lives 14 months before the banishment, all soft voice and perfectly timed tears, who had convinced Caius that Vespera was cold, distant, unworthy, who had whispered poison into his ear until he believed it, who had smiled at Vespera across the dinner table the night before the banishment with a look that said, "I've already won." And maybe she had. But Vespera had taken something with her when she left. Something Selene didn't know about. Something Caius had never bothered to ask about. She had taken his legacy, 3 children, 3 heirs, 3 living pieces of evidence that the wife he discarded had been carrying his bloodline while he bedded another woman. Now, 18 months later, the $400 was a distant memory. The savings she'd scraped together from odd jobs, cleaning houses, folding laundry at a motel off the highway, one brutal month of night shifts at a gas station, while an elderly neighbor watched the babies for free, had dwindled to $73. $73. 3 infants. No family, no friends, no plan except one. She was going back. Not for him. Not for reconciliation. Not because she missed the chandeliers or the cars or the staff who had called her Mrs. Orsino while looking through her like glass. She was going back because her children deserved to know where they came from. They deserved the medical care she couldn't afford, the education she couldn't provide, the inheritance that was theirs by blood whether their father wanted to acknowledge it or not. And if Caius Orsino thought he could throw her away and face no consequences, he was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his life. Some things cannot be banished. Some things come back. The night Vespera was banished, it had been raining. She remembered the sound of it against the tall windows of the estate's second-floor hallway, steady, relentless, indifferent. She remembered the way the chandelier light caught the droplets running down the glass, splitting into tiny rivers that merged and separated like veins. She had been walking back from the library, a book in her hand, a cup of tea gone cold on the side table she'd forgotten to retrieve. Small details, ordinary details, the kind that shouldn't matter but become impossible to forget when they're the last normal moments before everything breaks. She heard them before she saw them. Selene's voice first, low and honeyed, a voice that wrapped around words like silk around a blade. Then Caius, laughing. A sound Vespera hadn't heard directed at her in months. She stopped outside the bedroom door. Their bedroom. Hers and Caius's. The room where she had slept beside him for 4 years, where she had traced the scar on his shoulder blade and listened to him breathe in the dark, and believed, foolishly, that proximity meant something. The door was open 3 inches. Enough to see. Enough to understand. Selene was sitting on the edge of the bed. Caius was standing in front of her, his hand cupping her jaw like she was something precious. Something worth holding carefully. He had never held Vespera like that. She must have made a sound, a breath, a shift of weight, something. Because Caius turned, and when he saw her standing in the hallway, his expression didn't flicker with guilt or shame. It flickered with annoyance. "You're supposed to be asleep," he said. Not an apology, not an explanation, an accusation, as if she had done something wrong by existing in her own home at the wrong hour. Vespera opened her mouth to speak, but Selene was faster. "Caius, please." Selene's voice trembled, perfectly calibrated. "I told you she'd react this way. I told you she'd make me feel like an intruder. I can't. I can't do this anymore. I'll leave. I'll go tonight. I never should have come here." And Vespera watched her husband's face change, watched the annoyance melt into something protective, something fierce, as he turned back to Selene and said, "You're not going anywhere." Then he looked at Vespera. "You are." The words didn't register at first. They floated in the air like debris after an explosion, meaningless shapes that hadn't yet formed into recognizable damage. "What?" "I'm done pretending, Vespera. Selene makes me feel something. You make me feel like I'm sleeping next to a ghost. This marriage has been dead for years. I'm just finally saying it out loud. Caius, pack a bag. Take what you need. I'll have Dimitri give you cash. That's more than you're owed." She stood there. The book was still in her hand. Her fingers had gone numb around the spine. The rain continued against the windows, unbroken, uncaring, unchanged. 4 years, she whispered. 4 years, and you're throwing me out in the middle of the night for her? Caius's jaw tightened. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I'm your wife. You were my wife. Now you're someone who needs to leave before I have you escorted out." Selene was crying softly on the bed, theatrical tears rolling down perfect cheekbones. She didn't look at Vespera. She didn't have to. She had already won. Vespera left. She took the suitcase she had quietly packed over weeks, hidden in the back of her closet. She took the cash from Dimitri, who wouldn't meet her eyes. She walked out the front door at 11:47 p.m. in the rain, and she didn't look back. Not because she was strong, because if she looked back, she would have seen the silhouette of Selene standing at the upstairs window watching her go. And she would have seen her smiling. 18 months later, Caius Orsino was the same man he had always been. At least, that's what everyone believed. He stood 6'2" with the build that came from discipline, not vanity, broad shoulders, hands that had done things most men only read about, a face that revealed nothing unless he chose to let it. His hair was black, cut short, threaded with early silver at the temples. His eyes were the color of gunmetal, and they had a way of making people feel weighed and measured in a single glance. He ran an empire that stretched across 3 states. Shipping, real estate, construction, import businesses that existed on paper and others that didn't exist at all. He employed over 300 men, and every one of them understood the same unspoken truth. Caius Orsino did not make threats. He made decisions. And decisions, once made, were final. The estate had grown quieter since Vespera left. Selene had moved into the master bedroom within a week of the banishment. She redecorated. New curtains, new linens, a vanity table where Vespera's reading chair had been. She hosted dinners and smiled at Caius's associates and played the role of lady of the house with the ease of someone who had been rehearsing for it long before the part was hers. But something had shifted in the months that followed. The men noticed it first. The way Caius's patience had shortened. The way meetings ended more abruptly. The way he sometimes stood at the window of his study for long stretches, looking at nothing, saying nothing, his coffee growing cold on the desk behind him. His right hand, a man named Torvald Crane, who had worked for the family since Caius's father was alive, mentioned it once. "You've been distant, boss. Something on your mind?" Caius had looked at him with those gray-green eyes and said, "Nothing that concerns you." Torvald had nodded and never asked again, but he noticed. They all did. The house was fuller than it had ever been. Selene filled it with noise, with guests, with plans for renovations and parties and trips abroad. She talked constantly about the future, about what they would build together, about the children she wanted to give him. And yet the house felt emptier than it had when Vespera lived in it. That was the part Caius couldn't explain, even to himself. He dreamed about her sometimes. Not often, not every night, but enough. In the dreams, Vespera was always walking away from him. Down the long hallway of the estate, through the front door, into the rain. He would call her name, but no sound would come out. He would reach for her, but his arms wouldn't move. And she would keep walking, her back straight, and her suitcase in her hand, until she disappeared into the dark, and he woke up with his chest tight and his mouth dry. He never told Selene about the dreams. He never told anyone. But they had started 3 months after the banishment and they hadn't stopped. There were moments, small, private, unbidden, when Caius would see something that pulled Vespera back into his mind. A book on a shelf she used to read. The scent of chamomile tea drifting from the kitchen. The way the late afternoon light fell across the library floor at a certain angle, illuminating dust motes in a golden column. The way it used to when she sat in that chair by the window and didn't notice him watching her. He had loved her once. Or something close to it. Something that had felt like love before it calcified into routine. Before Selene's arrival had exposed how hollow the marriage had become. At least, that's what he told himself. But lately, a different thought had begun to surface. A thought he pushed down every time it rose, only to find it waiting for him again the next morning. What if the hollowness hadn't been Vespera? What if it had been him? She had tried. He remembered that now. Small efforts he had dismissed at the time. A hand on his shoulder when he came home late. Questions about his day that he'd answered in monosyllables. Dinners she'd arranged that he'd cut short for phone calls. She had tried, and he had treated her efforts like inconveniences, like interruptions to the life he was building instead of part of it. And then Selene had appeared. Selene, who laughed at his jokes. Selene, who never questioned his decisions. Selene, who made him feel like a king instead of a man who had forgotten how to be a husband. It had been easy to blame Vespera, easy to tell himself that she was the problem. Easy to send her away and call it clarity. But clarity wasn't supposed to feel like this. It wasn't supposed to feel like a door he had locked and couldn't stop walking past. A hallway in his own mind that he'd sealed off and told himself was empty. Even as he heard something moving behind the walls. He had banished his wife for a woman who made him feel powerful. And he had never once asked himself what he had made Vespera feel. Until now. The gates of the Orsino estate hadn't changed. Vespera stood outside them for a full minute before pressing the intercom button, the triplets secured in a second-hand triple stroller she'd bought from a pawn shop in Bracken Harbor. Stellan was asleep. Mira was chewing on her fist. Cale was watching the iron bars with wide, serious eyes, as if he understood that something important was about to happen. The intercom crackled. "State your business." She recognized the voice. Dimitri. The same man who had handed her $400 and refused to meet her eyes 18 months ago. "It's Vespera," she said. "Tell Caius his wife is home." Silence. Then the gates began to open. She walked up the gravel drive with the stroller rattling over the stones. The November wind cut through her coat. A wool pea coat she'd found at a Goodwill for $12, missing one button, but warm enough if she kept it closed with her hand. Her shoes were worn at the heels. Her hair was pulled back in a loose braid. She looked nothing like the woman who had left this place a year and a half ago. That woman had been crying. This woman was not. The front doors opened before she reached them. 2 guards she didn't recognize stepped out, hands hovering near their waists, eyes scanning her and the stroller with professional suspicion. "Mrs. Orsino," one of them said. "We weren't expecting you." "No," Vespera said. "I don't imagine you were." She walked past them without waiting for permission. The foyer was exactly as she remembered. Marble floors, vaulted ceiling, The chandelier that cost more than most people's houses, hanging like a frozen explosion of crystalline light. The smell of furniture polish and fresh flowers and something else. Something that used to smell like home, and now smelled like a museum. Selene's touch was everywhere. A new painting on the east wall. A different rug beneath the entryway table. Flowers arranged in a style Vespera had never used. Dramatic, showy, meant to be noticed. She noticed. Footsteps echoed from the hallway to her left. Heavy, measured, familiar. And then Caius Orsino stepped into the foyer. He stopped the moment he saw her. His face went through 3 expressions in the span of 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition, and something else. Something that flickered behind his eyes and vanished before she could name it. Vespera. Her name in his mouth. After 18 months of silence. It should have meant something. It didn't. Caius. His eyes dropped to the stroller. To the 3 infants bundled inside. His jaw tightened. What is this? This is your son Stellan. She pointed to each child in turn. Your daughter Mira. Your son Cale. They're 8 months old. They have your blood. They have your name. And they have never once seen their father's face. The silence that followed was so complete that Vespera could hear the chandelier crystals shifting in the draft from the open door. Caius stared at the children. His children. 3 sets of eyes looked back at him. Mira had stopped chewing her fist. Cale's serious gaze had fixed on the man standing before them with an intensity that seemed almost accusatory. You were pregnant, Caius said. His voice was flat, controlled. But something underneath it had fractured. I was. You didn't tell me. You didn't ask. Vespera's voice was steady. You were too busy replacing me to notice I was carrying triplets. So I left. I raised them alone. In a town you've never heard of, in an apartment that costs less per month than your wine budget per week. And now I'm here. Not for you. Not for this house. For them. She gestured to the stroller. They deserve what's theirs. Medical care, education, inheritance. The things you would have given them if you hadn't been so eager to throw their mother away. From somewhere behind Caius, another set of footsteps approached. Slower, lighter, the click of heels on marble. Selene appeared at Caius's shoulder, her eyes wide, her lips slightly parted, every detail of her expression calibrated to project innocent shock. Caius, what's going on? She looked at Vespera, then at the stroller, then back at Caius. And Vespera watched Selene's mask slip. Just for a moment. Just for half a second. But it was enough. Behind the performance of confusion, there was something else. Fear. The study was quieter than Vespera remembered. Caius had led her there without a word, leaving Selene standing in the foyer with her mouth still open and her hands clenched at her sides. 2 guards had been stationed outside the door. The stroller sat between Vespera and Caius's desk, like an artifact neither of them knew how to handle. Mira had started to fuss. Vespera lifted her out of the stroller and held her against her shoulder, swaying slightly, automatically, the way she had done 10,000 times in the past 8 months. The movement calmed Mira. It also gave Vespera something to do with her hands, something to focus on besides the man sitting behind the desk who was staring at his daughter like she was a document he couldn't quite read. Why didn't you contact me? Caius asked. Would you have listened? I would have. You would have what? Vespera's voice was soft, but it cut through his sentence like a blade through paper. Taken my call? Read my letter? You threw me out of this house at midnight in the rain. You gave me $400 and told me I was replaceable. You chose her over me without a single conversation, without a single question, without even the courtesy of asking if there was something I needed to tell you. She shifted Mira to her other shoulder. So no, Caius, I didn't contact you. Because you made it very clear that I didn't exist anymore. Caius was silent. His hands were flat on the desk, fingers spread, as if he were trying to anchor himself to something solid. "I didn't know," he said finally. "That's not an excuse. That's a confession." The words hung in the air. In the stroller, Cale began to whimper. Vespera reached down with her free hand and adjusted his blanket, tucking it tighter around his small body. The gesture was automatic, practiced. The gesture of a woman who had been the only person responsible for keeping 3 fragile lives alive. "They were born in May," she said. "May 14th. Stellan came first. Then Mira. 4 minutes later. Then Cale. 7 minutes after that. He was the smallest. He spent 3 weeks in the NICU. I sat beside his incubator every day, and every night I went back to a motel room that cost $39 and smelled like mildew. And I ate vending machine crackers for dinner because I couldn't afford anything else." Caius's jaw tightened. "I didn't know," he said again. "I heard you the first time." Vespera looked at him. "Now hear me. I'm not here to beg. I'm not here to reconcile. I'm not here because I want you back. I'm here because these children are Orsino's, whether you like it or not, and they will not grow up in poverty because their father was too proud to acknowledge them. I'm acknowledging them now. Words are cheap, Caius. I've heard your words before. I'll take care of you. You're mine. No one will ever hurt you." "Do you remember saying those things?" He didn't answer. "I do," Vespera said. "I remember every single one. And I remember how quickly they meant nothing the moment someone newer and shinier walked through the door." A knock at the study door interrupted them. Torvald Crane stepped in, his face carefully neutral. "Boss, there's something you need to see." Caius frowned. "Not now." "It's about Selene." Torvald's eyes flicked to Vespera, then back to Caius. "It's urgent." The room went very still. Vespera watched Caius's face change, watched the annoyance shift into something sharper, something that looked almost like dread. "What about her?" Torvald hesitated. He was a man who had seen terrible things and reported them without flinching. But whatever he was about to say made him pause. "We found discrepancies. In the accounts. Money moving to offshore accounts that aren't ours. Transfers that started 14 months before Mrs. Orsino left, the same month Selene arrived. 14 months before the banishment, the same month Selene had entered their lives." Vespera felt the words land in her chest like stones dropped into still water. She had suspected. Of course she had suspected. But suspicion was one thing. Confirmation was another. "How much?" Caius asked. His voice was barely above a whisper. Torvald looked at the floor. 2.3 million. So far. The truth came out in pieces over the next hour. Selene's real name wasn't Selene. It was Katrin Volk. She had a record in 2 countries. Fraud, embezzlement. 1 count of identity theft dismissed on a technicality. She had targeted wealthy men before. A shipping magnate in Hamburg, a real estate developer in Lisbon, and disappeared before they could catch her. Caius Orsino had been her biggest mark yet. Torvald laid the evidence on the desk in neat stacks. Bank statements, forged signatures, shell companies registered to addresses that didn't exist. A web of deception so intricate it had taken his forensic team 3 months to untangle it, and they had only started looking because a junior accountant had noticed a recurring transfer that didn't match any legitimate expense. "She played the long game," Torvald said. "Got close to you, made you trust her, made you send away anyone who might have noticed what she was doing." He didn't look at Vespera when he said that last part. He didn't have to. Caius sat behind his desk with his hands clasped in front of his mouth, staring at the documents like they were written in a language he had forgotten how to read. "She was going to leave," Torvald continued. "We found a flight booked for next week. One way to São Paulo. New passport. New name. She was going to take the money and disappear, and you would never have seen her again." Vespera listened to all of it without speaking. She watched Caius's face, watched the realization settle over him like a tide coming in. He had thrown away his wife for a woman who had never loved him. He had banished the mother of his children for a con artist who had been stealing from him the entire time. He had believed Seleni's tears and doubted Vespera's silence, and every choice he had made based on that belief had been built on a lie. "Where is she now?" Caius asked. "Confined to the East Wing, guards on every door." Caius nodded slowly. Then he looked at Vespera. For the first time since she had arrived, something in his expression cracked open. Not the control. Not the power. Something deeper. Something that looked almost like shame. "You tried to tell me," he said quietly. "Didn't you?" It wasn't a question. "I told you she wasn't what she seemed. You told me I was jealous." Vespera's voice was flat. "I told you something felt wrong. You told me I was being paranoid. I told you I needed you to listen to me, just once, just for 5 minutes. You told me to stop being dramatic." She held Mira a little tighter. "So yes, Caius, I tried, and you chose not to hear me." The confrontation happened in the East Wing drawing room. Solène was standing by the window when Caius entered. Her posture still perfect, her expression still composed. She had spent the last hour alone, and she had clearly used the time to prepare her defense. "Caius." She turned toward him with a small, wounded smile. "Whatever they've told you, it's not true. Someone is trying to turn you against me. Probably her." She gestured vaguely toward the door, toward the direction Vespera had gone. "She's always been jealous. She's always wanted to destroy what we have." Caius said nothing. He walked to the desk where Torvald had set down the evidence. He picked up one of the bank statements. Looked at it. Set it down. "Katrin Volk," he said. Solene's face flickered. "That's not my name." "It is. Hamburg. Lisbon. The shipping magnate you left with nothing. The real estate developer who killed himself 6 months after you disappeared. Those are lies. Someone fabricated." "Stop." The word was quiet. Final. Selene stopped. Caius looked at her. The woman he had shared his bed with. The woman he had trusted. The woman he had chosen over the mother of his children. "I believed you," he said. "When you told me Vespera was cold. When you told me she didn't understand me. When you cried and said you were afraid of her. I believed every word. And the entire time, you were stealing from me." "Caius, please. $2.3 million. That's what Torvald found. Is there more?" Solene's composure cracked. Her eyes darted to the door, calculating distance, calculating odds. "There's nowhere to go," Caius said. "Every exit is covered. Every car is accounted for. The flight to São Paulo has been cancelled. Your new passport has been confiscated. Whatever you thought was going to happen next, it's not." For a long moment Solène stood perfectly still. Then her face changed. The softness disappeared. The vulnerability evaporated. And underneath it was something hard and cold and utterly unrecognizable. "She was so easy to get rid of," Solène said. Her voice was different now. Flat, almost amused. "Your wife. All I had to do was make you feel wanted. Make her feel invisible. You did the rest yourself. You pushed her away. You ignored her. You made her feel like nothing. And then you blamed her for not being enough." She smiled. "The truth is, Caius, you were the easiest mark I've ever had, because you wanted to believe that you deserved better than her. And I let you." Caius's hand closed into a fist at his side. "Get her out of my house," he said to Torvald. "I don't care where she goes. I don't care what happens to her. But she doesn't exist here anymore." 2 guards stepped forward. Solène didn't resist. She let them take her arms, let them lead her toward the door. But just before she crossed the threshold, she looked back. You'll regret this, she said. Not because of me, because of her. She'll never forgive you. And you'll spend the rest of your life knowing that you threw away the only person who actually loved you. The door closed behind her, and Caius stood alone in the room where he had dismantled his own life, one choice at a time. Vespera was in the nursery when Caius found her. Not the old nursery, a room on the third floor that the staff had hastily prepared in the 2 hours since her arrival. 3 cribs borrowed from storage, clean linens, a rocking chair moved from another wing. It wasn't much, but it was warm and it was quiet, and the triplets had finally fallen asleep. She was standing by the window, looking out at the ground she had once walked every morning, the garden she had once tended, the life she had once tried to build in this place. Caius stopped in the doorway. "She's gone," he said. Vespera didn't turn around. "I heard. The money will be recovered, most of it. Torvald has people tracking the accounts." "Good." Silence. Caius took a step into the room, then another. He stopped beside the first crib, where Stellan slept with his small fist curled against his cheek. "He looks like my father," Caius said quietly. "I know. My father died when I was 12. He was difficult, demanding. I spent most of my childhood trying to earn his approval, and most of my adulthood trying to forget how much it hurt when I didn't." Vespera turned, looked at him, said nothing. "I don't know how to be a father," Caius said. "I don't know how to be the kind of man who deserves these children. I didn't know how to be the kind of husband who deserved you." "No," Vespera said. "You didn't." The agreement landed without softness. Caius nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He just stood there, looking at his son, wearing his regret like a coat he couldn't take off. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said. "I know what I did. I know it can't be undone. But I'm asking—" He stopped. Started again. "I'm asking if you'll let me try. Not as your husband. You don't owe me that. But as their father. Let me try to be something to them. Something better than what I was to you." Vespera was silent for a long time. She thought about the apartment in Bracken Harbor, the mildewed hallways, the radiator that didn't work, the nights she had sat awake with all 3 babies crying and no one to help, no one to call, no one who even knew she existed. She thought about the $400 he had handed her like she was a problem to be solved. She thought about Selen's smile in the window. And she thought about her children, Stellan, Mira, Kale. 3 lives she had carried and delivered and raised alone. 3 lives that deserved more than what she could give them in a 3rd-floor walk-up with a yellow curtain hiding a view of a brick wall. "I'm not staying here," she said finally. "Not in this house. Not with you. I'll find a place nearby, close enough that you can see them, far enough that I don't have to pretend we're something we're not." Caius nodded. "I'll pay for it. Whatever you need." "You'll pay for them," Vespera said. "Their education, their health care, their future. That's not generosity. That's obligation." "I understand. And I'll have a lawyer. My own lawyer. Everything in writing. No verbal promises. No trust. Not anymore." "That's fair." Vespera looked at him. The man she had married. The man she had loved. Once. In a way that felt very far away now. The man who had thrown her out in the rain and learned nothing until it was nearly too late. "I don't forgive you," she said. "Maybe I will someday. Maybe I won't. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because my children deserve a father who shows up. If you can be that, then be that. If you can't, I'll raise them alone like I've been doing. And they'll be fine. They'll be fine because they have me." Mira stirred in her crib, let out a small sound, settled again. Caius looked at his daughter, then at his sons. Then at the woman who had carried them into the world with no help, no support, and no acknowledgement. "You're the strongest person I've ever known," he said. Vespera didn't smile. "I didn't have a choice." She walked past him toward the door, stopped with her hand on the frame. "You wanted to know what you made me feel," she said without turning around. "All those years, all those silences. You made me feel invisible. You made me feel like I was screaming into a void. And when I finally stopped screaming, you didn't even notice." She looked back at him. "That's what you made me feel. Now you know." She walked out, and Caius Orsino stood alone in a nursery he had never imagined, surrounded by the sounds of 3 children breathing, finally understanding the weight of everything he had lost. 6 months later, spring had arrived in full. The house Vespera had chosen sat at the edge of a quiet neighborhood called Hartwell Crossing, far enough from the Orsino estate to feel like a different world. It was a 2-story cottage with a blue door and a small garden out back, where she had planted tomatoes and basil and a row of sunflowers that the triplets liked to stare at from their playpen. The kitchen had a window that faced east. Every morning the light came through in long golden bars, warming the table where she fed the children their breakfast, warming the floor where they practiced crawling, warming the life she had built from nothing. Stellan had started pulling himself up on furniture. Mira had learned to clap her hands and laughed every time she did it. Kale, the smallest, had finally caught up to his siblings in weight and had developed a habit of babbling to himself in a language only he understood. Vespera watched them grow, every day, every hour. And every time she looked at them, she felt something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Pride. Not because they were Orsinos, not because they were heirs to anything, but because they were hers. Because she had carried them alone, delivered them alone, raised them alone, and they were alive, and healthy, and laughing in a kitchen full of sunlight. That was enough. That was everything. Caius visited twice a week. He came on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and he came alone, without guards, without the armor of his reputation. He sat on the floor of the living room and let the triplets crawl over him. He learned how to hold a bottle at the right angle. He learned which lullaby Kale liked and which one made Mira cry. He learned the things a father learns when he shows up, over and over, even when he doesn't know what he's doing. He never asked Vespera to come back. He never pressured, never pushed. He paid for everything she needed and asked for nothing in return except time with his children. And slowly, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, something between them began to change. Not love, not forgiveness, not yet, but something. On a Saturday in late April, Caius arrived at the cottage with a package under his arm. He handed it to Vespera without explanation. She opened it. Inside was a framed photograph. The triplets at 5 months old, taken by a photographer she had hired with money she'd saved from cleaning houses. Stellan, Mira, and Kale, lying on a white blanket, their hands intertwined and their faces turned toward the camera. On the back, Caius had written something. "The only legacy that matters." Vespera looked at the words for a long time, then she looked at Caius. He was standing in her kitchen, in her house, in the life she had built without him. And for the first time since she had walked back through the gates of the Orsino estate, he looked like a man instead of a monument. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. "I'll see you Tuesday." He left. Vespera hung the photograph on the wall beside the kitchen window, where the light hit it every morning, where the triplets could see it when they sat in their high chairs, where she could look at it while she drank her coffee, and remember that she had survived the worst thing that had ever happened to her. And she had come out the other side, holding 3 miracles. That evening, after the triplets were asleep, Vespera sat in the rocking chair by the nursery window. The sky was turning violet. The sunflowers in the garden were closed for the night. And somewhere, in a mansion across town, a man who had once thrown her away, was probably standing at his own window, thinking about everything he had lost. But Vespera wasn't thinking about him. She was thinking about tomorrow, about Stellan learning to stand, about Mira's laugh, about Kale's babbling and the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. She was thinking about the life ahead, the one she had chosen, the one she had fought for. And for the first time in a very long time, Vesper Lysen, she had reclaimed her name, felt something she had almost forgotten existed. Peace. Not the absence of struggle, the presence of strength. She closed her eyes. And in a small cottage at the edge of Hartwell Crossing, a woman who had been banished, forgotten, and erased, breathed out the last of her old life and breathed in the first full breath of her new one. The children were safe. The past was behind her. And tomorrow? Tomorrow was hers.